all polling places across the European Union are now closed. And the European Parliament, it looks set for a shift to the right. That said, the centre-right European People's Party, the EPP, looks poised to remain the biggest party in the Assembly. Now, that's the party of Ursula von der Leyen, who you see right here. She is president of the European Commission. If projections hold, she will likely serve a second term as Commission president. She says the EPP will build a bastion against extremes on the left and the right. The party's strong showing was enough to fend off a challenge by far-right groups, which are expected to gain seats in the European Parliament. And with those results coming in, we are getting now a clearer idea about the future makeup of the European Parliament. Let's take a look at the numbers. This is what the chamber has looked like for the past 5 years. You can see the EPP was and remains the biggest bloc. That's the group that includes right-of-center parties, such as Germany's Christian Democrats and Spain's People's Party. And they remain the biggest group in the projected new parliament, with an unchanged number of seats. But we can see the biggest swings are on opposite ends of the spectrum, with voters turning their backs on Europe's Green Party, you see right there, and a swing towards the ID group. Those are the far-right and populist parties. They do not, however, include Germany's AfD. That party was expelled from the group earlier this year. All right, let's get the European perspective from everything that has happened today. I'm joined by our Brussels bureau chief, Alexandra from Nahmen. In Brussels, Alexandra, wow, what an evening it has been. The far right has clearly seen a big surge in these elections. What else do we know this evening?
Well, Bernd, you're right that the European Parliament swings to the right with centre-right, but also far-right parties set to take the largest number of seats in this parliament. And the clear winner of this night is, as it seems, the centre-right European People's Party. They will remain the largest group in the parliament, and we already heard from their lead candidate, Ursula von der Leyen, addressed her supporters, thanking them and declaring victory for her group. And now she has the best chances to be, again, the next President of the European Commission. She needs the approval of the 27 heads of state and government in 27 member states. Then she needs the approval of the European Parliament. And apparently, despite what she said on the campaign trail, that she would imagine working together with some far-right groups, now she's saying, as you mentioned, that her party will build a bastion against extreme forces on the left and on the right. And that means that she's hoping for the support of the Social Democrats in the European Parliament and the Liberals. All of them are calling on each other to work together because they describe themselves as the pro-European forces in the European Parliament.
Alexandra, look into your crystal ball. How do you see this new composition forming in the European Parliament? How do you see that impacting and influencing European policies for the next 5 years?
Well, I would assume that for the pro-European forces, it will become more difficult to work together and to implement their pro-European agenda, with radical parties and the far right having so many seats in the European Parliament. And it will be the key question here whether the far right will kind of unite and vote together on important issue. That is something that was always very difficult for them, and whether they will be able to prevent some key European initiatives from happening. Initiatives that they don't like, you know, the advancing the Green Deal or other legislations on topics such as migration, on defense spending.
Our Brussels bureau chief, Alexandra von Nahmen, with the latest tonight, walking us through the numbers and the consequences of the election. Alexandra, thank you.
Anytime.
DW correspondent Jack Parrock, he is in Warsaw at the headquarters of the right-wing Law and Justice Party. I asked him to tell us more about the exit polls in Poland.
Well, it looks like it's a good success for the Prime Minister Donald Tusk and his civic coalition platform. He has basically claimed the victory and said that they have shown that they are the light of hope in Europe. It looks like they'll get 21 of the 53 seats for Poland. I'm here at the Law and Justice Party. They appear, according to the early projections, to have taken 19 of those 53. Jarosław Kaczynski, who's the president of the party, came on stage just behind me. I think you can see the former Prime Minister there, Mateusz Morawiecki. He's talking to the press. But Kaczynski came out and he said, listen, these are important elections for us. We can learn from this. They want to remount a campaign to take over the national governance of this country, which they lost in October 2023 last year. So Tusk is claiming victory. The Law and Justice Party is still there. It was broadly predicted to be about neck and neck. Tusk's party appears to have just edged it. And for Poland tonight, that will be a strong showing for him. He'll say that that also shows authority for his government here.
DW's Jack Parrock with the latest from Warsaw, Poland tonight. Jack, thank you. Buddy, let's go to Fanny. She's in Budapest, Hungary for us. Talk us through the numbers that you've got so far, Fanny.
There are no final results yet that could take up until 11 p.m. or even midnight until we have the final results trickling in. But it definitely looks like this is not going to be a walk in the political park, to say so, to Viktor Orban, whose party, the ruling Fidesz party, easily got more than 50% of the votes you just mentioned during the past 3 European parliamentary elections. Now, polls forecast around an average around 45% of the votes, which would still translate to at least half of the 21 seats available up for grabs for Hungary to be represented in the European Parliament. But here is a but. There's a new politician, basically, or a political newcomer. That's Peter Magyar, whose name nobody knew internationally for sure, but also here in Hungary, only some people knew Peter Magyar for being the former husband of the former Justice Minister of Hungary, who had to resign, just like the former president of Hungary, as it emerged that both of them have pardoned a man who's been convicted for covering up sexual abuse in Hungary. Now, that rocked really the political elite here in the country, and that's when Peter Magyar, who's been part of the Fidesz system, decided he's going to go against it, and quite successfully indeed. If you look at just how many people turned out at protests against the government during the past months, where he was campaigning across the country for change, he says, against corruption and for a system against Orban. But now here's the question, of course. If you look at his party, the TISZA party, that appears like a moderate right-wing party, and then you look at the far-right party of the governing Fidesz party, you just really wonder, if you look at the polls, and I'm talking about the polls before people started to cast a ballot today, it really appears that at least 80% of Hungarians will have casted their ballot for a party on the right political spectrum in Hungary. So really the question is then, how much will be left actually for the Liberals, for the Greens here in Hungary? That's really unclear, and we just have to see really what the results are going to bring.
And funny, I mean, the gains for the right, or right-leaning, they are significant, because if we look at total turnout for this election, turnout is high, isn't it? And I think I was reading it's at least higher than it was 5 years ago.
So far, and once again, we do not have the final results yet, but the numbers we have indicate that so far, at least until 6:30 p.m. local time, in fact, people cast a ballot in an overwhelming way. 34% more cast a ballot in European elections, but also local elections, because there are 2 elections in Hungary today, parliamentary elections, but also local elections. So we're speaking about nearly 35% more votes this time around compared to 2019. And the question is it to the mobilization factor of the government, the mobilization factor of the TISZA party and the political newcomer here, or does it have to do with the very fact that, once again, there are 2 elections going on here, the parliament elections and the local elections? Once is for sure that the people here have been really electrified during the past months because the political landscape here in Hungary seems to be changing, adding a new figure to the political landscape, Peter Magyar and his Tisza party. Really nobody just knows what that will mean onward. Onward, that means after the European elections, and what will it mean until 2026 when parliament elections will take place again here in Hungary.
DW's Fanny with the latest from Budapest in Hungary. Fanny, as always, thank you. I want to go now to a country that could be the kingmaker in the future makeup of the European Parliament. I'm talking about Italy. My colleague Bernd Riegert, he is in Rome. He is at a polling station, I understand, at Colosseo, Rome. Bernd, good to see you. I know we won't be getting the numbers for Italy until much, much later. So I want to ask you about the Prime Minister Meloni. What is her plan if her party wins?
Yeah, the polling stations in Italy close at 11 p.m. People are now coming to vote actually before dinner in Italy, and it gets a little bit more busy here. Turnout so far is quite low. We only have the opinion polls, but they all say that Giorgia Meloni will win big. She will be the woman that has the biggest block here of votes after this elections. And she made this election into a midterm election actually about herself and about her government. Europe did not play much of a role here in this European election. And Giorgia Meloni is trying to team up with Marine Le Pen from Rassemblement National in France to build a new, bigger right-wing group in the European Parliament. There are about 30 right-wing parties in the Parliament, and Meloni's Fratelli d'Italia will only have 20 seats there, so that's not much, but she will be one of the biggest blocks in these 30 parties. She will try to unite them to have a greater influence, a greater stance, and she's also reaching out to the Christian Democrats. Cooperation in certain fields might be possible, and also cooperation to elect the next EU Commission President, which will be probably the one we have now, Ursula von der Leyen. And Ursula von der Leyen, on the other side, is not excluding to work with Giorgia Meloni as long as she remains or appears to be a European. The only thing that divides the right-wingers in the European Parliament is actually the question about Ukraine and Russia's war against Ukraine. There, the parties are split in the middle, but Meloni and also the French leader Marine Le Pen promised to overcome this dispute and to join forces in the next Parliament.
And Bernd, when we talk about Italian voters, do we know what is the motivating force? What were the issues that made them make the decisions that they're making right now?
The campaign in Italy was clearly driven by domestic issues like inflation, business, economic growth, social welfare, medical care, and things like that, because we also have in parallel local elections, so everybody was focused on the issues right on his doorsteps. And as I said, Meloni made this into a vote about her government, and for example, the migration issue that is of concern in all of Europe did not play such a big role here in Italy, because the Italians accepted that Meloni and also the governments that preceded her are following a stricter path and pushing for more controls and processing migrants outside of the European Union and outside of Italy. So it was, at least what we can say, a domestic election with a little bit of a European flavor.
Maybe you could help us understand, Meloni and her party, her politics are classified as right or far right, but when we're talking about where they would fit in the European Parliament, in these groupings there, it appears, at least on the outside, that the Conservatives are willing to overlook that label, or maybe not even consider that label, and to do business with Meloni and her party. I mean, is that what is going on here? Maybe are they saying they're going to hold their nose and do business because they need her and her party?
That might happen if you weigh the words of Ursula von der Leyen, the Christian Democratic lead candidate. She said Mrs. Meloni is a European in her view and a good Democrat. So she does not exclude to work with her. And on the other hand, Meloni is not excluding it either. Giorgia Meloni is currently the head of a party family with more or less, can you say that, moderate right-wingers. So not the farthest right, but a little bit of right and right-wing populists. And she's trying to expand that. And she's also portraying herself as a moderate on the European stage, although on a domestic level she also has some illiberal tendencies. But in Europe, she is portraying herself as the perfect European, siding with all the majority votes in the European Council, where the heads of states and government meet. So, she's trying, to mingle also with the civil platforms and the Christian Democrats in the middle.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's the art of making certain politics palatable to a majority. Fascinating. Bernd Riegert in Rome, Italy. Bernd, thank you. All right, I'm joined now from Brussels by Rosa Balfour. She's director of the think tank Carnegie Europe. Rosa, it's good to have you with us. There's a lot to filter through here. So let me just ask you, based on the numbers we've got so far, I mean, what stands out to you? What are your first impressions?
Well, my first impression is that the polls have been correct. They have actually been identifying the big trends. It has to be said that this hasn't always been the case. I wasn't expecting the polls to get it quite so right. What are the big trends? Clearly, the radical right is gaining ground. It looks like the Identity and Democracy group, which is to the far right of the political spectrum in the European Parliament, looks like it's going to get some more votes. The European Conservatives are also going to get more votes. That's the party that Giorgia Meloni is heading. There are a number of non-aligned parties as well, and that's a little bit of a question mark as to whether they're going to join one or the other of the group. For instance, AfD has just been expelled from the Identity and Democracy group. So there's things moving at the right end of the spectrum. The other trend is that clearly the EPP has made gains in many countries, as far as we can tell so far. So it's going to be the biggest group. We'll be able to choose whether it wants to lean a bit more towards the centre or whether it wants to lean a bit more towards the right. Yeah. My expectation is that it will continue to lean towards the centre, but nonetheless, the radical right will be more influential in the next European Parliament. Yeah,
let's talk about the far right. These parties were expected to surge. We've seen that here in Germany with the Alternative for Germany, the AfD. It's likely to be the second largest party or political force after the Christian Democrats in Germany. But where else are we seeing that type of growing support?
Yeah, well, in Austria it looks set to become the first party, which is actually quite extraordinary. And then, well, for the other parties, we need to really wait for the results. I think it's a bit too early to make predictions for the other countries. In Belgium, they seem to be doing well. But again, it's a little bit early. Of course, in some countries, for instance, in Belgium and in Bulgaria, there are also national elections taking place. So, these are countries that need to be looked at carefully because it's not just another vote for a faraway institution. It could also potentially be telling us something about national results.
Yeah, I want to pick up on Austria just for a second. I mean, why do we know why we're seeing this incredible support for the far right? As you say, the party there looks set to be the strongest party in Austria.
Yeah, no, Austria is quite extraordinary. Let's not forget that FPO has already been in government and was in government not that long ago, and it lost support because of corruption charges and because of its relations with Russia. So it really seems to be indicative of a surge towards the right. People know what this party supports. They know this party has a track record of corruption, of siding with Russia, but still people are voting for him. But for FPO. So, and they're going to be national elections in Austria in September, October. So this result for the European Parliament is very telling of what might come next.
There is this surge to the right that we've seen throughout large parts of Europe. In the Netherlands, for example, the right doesn't seem to have polled as well as expected. What do we know why?
So, I mean, the first thing, when we're looking at European Parliament elections, we need to know that they are 27 different national elections. So every country will have its own context. So what has happened in the Netherlands? In the Netherlands, there were elections several months ago, and the far-right party led by Geert Wilders came first with about 23% of the vote, and therefore had a right to form a coalition. And it's taken it months to actually be able to form that coalition. And the agreement only came through a few weeks ago, and then eventually they even found the prime minister. So I guess perhaps if it's not doing quite as well as it did a few months ago, it might just be a reflection of the length of time and of the negotiations that had to take place in order to form a coalition agreement. Now, in these negotiations, Wilders had to give up on some of his most extreme demands, the ones that were anti-constitutional. You know, it could be that perhaps some of the hardcore voters of his party decided that he wasn't, carrying through his commitments. That could be one explanation. Another explanation could be that maybe other people turned up to vote. It's a bit early, really, to give explanations on these matters, but maybe people against PVV, shocked by the results at the national level, turned out to vote for the European Parliament elections. I mean, there are all sorts of explanations. It's a bit early to say anything with certainty.
Rosa, I know your organization, Carnegie Europe, you've been charting the influence of the far right on European foreign policy. So we certainly don't have the final results, but let's assume that what we're seeing here is going to carry on through the evening. I mean, how could these elections, how could they affect the EU decision-making when it comes to foreign policy?
Yeah, so on foreign policy matters in particular, we need to remember that it's member states that really are in the driving seat. And what we have is that at the moment, out of the 27 member states, 7 countries are governed by the radical right. Now, this could be in a coalition agreement, or it could be that it's the only party in power, for instance, Hungary, or it could be that the radical right party is giving external support, okay? So what we're seeing now, we have 7 parties. The Austrian vote suggests that the next Austrian government will be the 8th member state led by the radical right. How has this impacted foreign policy? And you would expect, with so many countries shifting to the right, and now with the European Parliament heavily shifting towards the right, I mean, we're talking about 25% of the European Parliament, the radical, filled by radical right members of Parliament, you would expect them perhaps to be more influential on foreign policy and on other matters as well. So on foreign policy, they have been punching below their weight. Why? Because they are very divided. One of the most divisive issues is obviously Russia, but also NATO, the United States, China. So many of these big issues that Europeans are dealing with at the moment, and that are going to be at the heart of the big challenges facing Europe in the coming years. On these issues, the radical right are divided, and they don't really have answers. Therefore, they are less influential than they could be. On other issues, they have been hugely influential, and I would argue migration has been one area where the radical right has shaped policy, even if it hasn't made policy. It's been shaping policy for the past 10 years because mainstream political parties have shifted towards the right in adopting tougher policies, restricting immigration to Europe and restricting asylum seekers and refugees coming to Europe. So that's where the radical right has been hugely influential, and I expect the coming parliament will continue in that direction. The other area where the radical right will be very influential is on all matters related to fighting the climate crisis. They're already rolling back, and the centre-right, the EPP, has been quite open to diluting some of the big commitments and the big ambitions that Europe has made as a global leader in fighting the climate crisis. So this is another area.
Rosa Balfour from the Carnegie Endowment for Peace in Brussels. A lot to think about there. Rosa, we appreciate your analysis tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much.